All right, in this video, what we're going to cover is how to make graphs in Excel. So we're going to start with scatterplots. Scatterplots are something that you actually would need the full data set for. So it tells you to just open the data set or a regression graph. In this case, we're just going to make some data up. So we have some sort of X variable, and then we'd have some sort of Y variable. Give me just a second, I'll make this bigger. There we go. So now we're going to just make some data up. Oops, got excited. So let's make up at least 10 data points here for both variables. So there probably won't be very good scatter relationship between them, but I can do my best here. Okay. So when you have one X and one Y column, what you would then do is go over here to Insert, and we're going to work here in the Graphs section. So this should be the same for Excel 2016 for both Windows and Mac. If you're taking my course from Missouri State, you can download the newest version of Office for free from the school so that you're using the same version of Excel that I am. If you have older versions, like 2011 and 2010 for Windows, 11 for Mac, instructions are slightly different, but they're not so different that you couldn't figure it out. I also have videos on my YouTube channel of 2011 and 2010 Excel and Mac. Excel, Windows, and Mac, if you would like to watch those instead. Anyway, all right, so let's make a scatter plot. So to do that, I'm going to highlight both columns, and we can actually look and see what it recommends for us. And the thing it recommends, number one, first is a scatter plot. But if I don't want to do that, I can click here and pick a simple scatter plot. And what that does is it just gives me a very basic scatter plot. Now this is hideous, and we don't want to present this because I don't know what any of this means. So in APA style, we don't use titles. So first thing I'm going to do is delete this title. So I just clicked on it till I got the four little dots, and just deleted it. Additionally, we also don't tend to use these lines. So I'm just going to kind of click and delete until I have what I would consider a traditional scatter plot, where I have an X and a Y axis, but I don't have any of the extra crap lines. Now I want to add a couple of things here. So I'm going to click Add Chart Element. This is where 95% of the action is going to happen for all the graphs we'll talk about today. So I'm going to click Add Chart Element. Under Axes, I've got my primary horizontal, so I could actually turn it off, but that's not what I want. Instead, I want to change Axis Titles. So I want to add one here for X, Add Chart Element, Axes Titles, add one here for Y. So you should always have an X and Y axis title. Tell me what these are. So to change the text, click on it till you get the four squares. Click one more time and you'll get the long blinking arrow thing, or it's not an arrow, bar. And now I should be able to type something. So a couple things to note here, and we are very picky about scoring these graphs, so just a warning in advance. You always have to have the X and Y axis label, and they always have to be in proper case. And what I mean by proper case is capitalize all the words, not like of and the and, that sort of thing, but all the other words you should capitalize. Yes, I will count off for that every single time that you do not do it. So don't lose these points, they're very easy. Right, so a descriptive X axis label in proper case. Click once, click again. Now let's highlight this thing. Get rid of that and do descriptive Y-axis label. And that would be whatever we're measuring. So from the last video, we might be doing femininity and sympathy scores. I don't know how I came up with such a nice, pretty correlation, but this would be a positive correlation. And that would be the type of scatter plot I'd ask you to present. If you want to get real technical, we could change these dots to be black, because most journals only print in black and white. So what I did was change colors, and then I just picked the black and white one here. Now one thing I hate is Calibri, so you could click Home, and this is just getting really technical. I could change all of this to Arial is a good font, or Times. I know that doesn't look that different, But what I could also do is change that to Times New Roman. That's the most common one. And to do that, I would click on each little piece. So don't just change the label, also change the axis here, because it looks weird when you have mixed and matched fonts. Okay. And that's also true if you're writing a research paper. Don't have the font be Times New Roman and then the header and the footer be Calibri. Really annoys me. It's one of Word's most irritating features, but it's also clear you haven't paid enough attention to really focus on getting that correct. Okay. So I'm going to upload this on Blackboard, so I'm going to label this Scatterplot, or I'm going to try. It's being cranky. Okay, maybe some other day I will label this Scatterplot. Not today, apparently. So let's go ahead and save this. I'm also battling with a cat who's very determined to get pets in my face while I'm recording. The joys of owning pets. Andy Field would be so proud. There we go. Scatterplots. There we go. Now let's say I wanted to change this X and Y axis here to have them be the same, because right now it's a little weird that they're not the same. So I could click on the axis and then right click on it. And you can click Format Axis, and we would change the units here to be 1. So you can kind of futz around with this until it looks the way you want it to look. Okay. And then I can change the color. I can do a lot of different things. So I got my axis here. So now if I wanted to change this axis for some reason, let's say 0 is not a valid score, like you actually cannot score 0 on this and it's really 1 to 10, I can format the axis and see where it says minimum here, can make that 1. Okay. Let's click over here, now it went away. Now let's do that same thing for this axis. And so that's how I change. Gotta get just the axis highlighted here. So let me close that window, click one more time. I want just the axis and not the whole graph, because otherwise I can't get back to where I want it to go. And so that's how you change the minimum and maximum so that it only shows you valid data points. Okay. So apparently when I was trying to change the scatterplot name, I accidentally changed the label. There we go. All right, come here, kitty cat. Go away. All right, so there's a nice, pretty scatterplot that I could present in a journal. Another thing I can do is add the regression line. Okay. There's 2 ways to do this. You can right-click on a single dot, click Add Trend Line. Okay, that's one option. Or under Chart Design, Add Chart Element. You can add a trend line here. Okay. And then there is our trend line. Now, if I wanted this to not be dotted, I could click on the trend line. And it's hard to see, but it's got the 2 dots on either end of the trend line. Right click, click Format Trend Line. And then now this is where I could change maybe how it looks. So there are a couple of different options. I could do logarithmic, polynomial, moving average. I don't want any of that. Instead, I just want how it looks. So we could do dash type here, instead pick solid line. Okay. So a couple different options. We could do gradient lines. Automatic apparently is a dotted line. I think a solid line is much more common. All right, and so that would be, oops, it stayed. Irritating. Format trend line. Click on the little paint thing here and do solid line. Okay. Under dash type, I have to pick solid line. There we go. So that is how I can add a regression line to my scatterplot. So that would be something I might do for regression analysis. Let's try now 1 IV bar charts. This is where I only have 1 independent variable. So what you'll have to do is first type in your means. So we're going to give those 2 labels. We're going to have control group and experimental group. Okay. And whatever you type here is what's going to come up on the bar. So make this look pretty so you don't have to edit it again later. So actually the first thing you have to do is type in labels. Okay. And then this is where you would type in the mean. So let's say the control group mean is 12 points and the experimental group mean is 15 points. Now we're going to do that exact same thing, not right next to it for reasons I'll get to in a second. Oops. Instead of doing Control C, I did Control X. There we go. We're going to type in the either standard deviation or standard error. You can do either one. And let's say it's 2 points here and 1 point. Let's make it small so you can see the difference. 1 point here. And where are we going to get these numbers? I'm going to get these numbers from my JASP output, or my output from any graph thing, but specifically we're pairing Excel with JASP here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to click Insert again. Now I haven't highlighted this down here for a reason. We'll click Recommended Chart. It's going to recommend a column chart. It's weird, they call these column charts and these bar charts, and I think it's a little odd. I want the ones where the bars go up and down. That's more common. And we could pick clustered even though we only have one variable. And that is really huge, so let me make it a little smaller. Oops. And then I crashed Excel. What a day. 2 seconds here while I reopen what we were just doing. Or not. There we go. This is why I hit save a lot. So let me highlight this again. Click Insert, and hopefully yours doesn't crash like mine did. Click Clustered Column. There. Okay, we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to delete this mean. I'm going to delete these bars because this is a much cleaner graph. I would like a y-axis line here. So to do that, I think, I'm not sure we can do it over here. But I think we can do this in Format Axis. So I'm going to click on this, right click, Format Axis. And I feel like somewhere around here we can get it to give us the line. So ticks, labels, numbers, somewhere, right? Line here, and let's do solid line. See what that did. Perfect. I don't know why I made it blue, but if I wanted to, I could come back to it and tell the line to be black. And that's more traditional, I feel like, to have this sort of click off the chart so you can see solid line. But now this makes this gray line look funny, so we'd want to do the same thing here. All right, click on the little fill thing here. Let's do solid line, and hopefully that will now match. Perfect. So we have a clearly defined chart area. Now, I would prefer this graph be in black and white. You can make it in color if you like, but most journals don't print in color, so I have to click on the graph first. I can go under Chart Design here and click Change Colors, and I could make it black and white. So it's going to be kind of gray, and there's going to be a good reason to do this kind of gray, as you'll see here in a second. Okay. Now, I want to also change this to a not ugly font, so I'm going to make this Times New Roman. Often I tell students to make it at least 12 so it's visible, because the smaller the font gets, the harder it is to read. We're also going to add the axis labels, so click Chart Design, Add Chart Element, Axis Title. We're going to do horizontal and vertical. So I'm going to have to change that font as well. So 3/4 of what you're going to be doing here is changing the stupid font. And what's this title? Why should I have a title if I already have grouped bars? Because you should. So condition group. So sometimes this is sufficient to have control group and experimental group. Sometimes the labels won't be clear what variable you're talking about. Let's say you have multiple variables. So always kind of add a descriptive X title. Our axis title here, I'm going to change the font. And let's see, what do we want to make that? We would say mean dependent variable, whatever that is. Oops, spelling also important. There we go. All right. Now I might change the length of y here if you can't get 0. So I might cut this off at 1. One thing you don't want to do is make this like 12 to 16, because then you're really stretching the graph. So make this range here the range of possible scores in the data. Okay. So if scores range from 6 to 20, I might make this 6 to 20. We don't want to stretch the y-axis to imply bigger differences, but we also don't want to shrink the y-axis to, let's say the range of the scores were 0 to 100, but nobody scored above 20. You wouldn't want to show 0 to 100, because then it would show that there weren't any differences between your groups, when really there probably were. So it tends to do this as the range of the data that you have, because that's where the graph is viable, is the range of the data that you have. Okay. And generally this is the range of the scale of the data. So if it's a 1 to 7 scale, this often will be 1 to 7. But if nobody marks above a 4, should you show everybody all those 7s? Because you don't even have numbers up in that range. So it's kind of a theoretical argument. This would be a great graph, except that it doesn't really tell me. We've talked a lot about means are great, but they're a point estimate. And point estimates don't tell me the precision of the data. They don't tell me what a range of scores might be. So we're going to add some error bars. There are lots of ways to do error bars. And as long as you're clear about what type you're using, any of them are fine. So I'm going to click, and this is where it's going to be the most complicated clicking. So I'm going to click here on the bar. Okay. And what I want to do is add an error bar. So I'm going to click Chart Design, Add Chart Element, Error Bars. Now it's very tempting to click these little buttons because then you'll have bars and they'll look right. Those are wrong. Don't do that. Click More Error Bar Options. So we would like both an upper and a lower. This is why gray might be a more useful number. We would like to leave the cap thing alone. Don't do fixed. Don't do any of these options. Click Custom. And then click Specify Value. And this is why we put the standard deviations over here. I'll click that. Now, that only does that for the top. You also need to do it for the bottom. So click on this little button right here and highlight the same area. Okay. So now that will do the error bars as 2 for the first one and 1 for the second one. So you'll see that these, okay, they're kind of tiny. So let's maybe make it a different color gray. So that's even more readable. So you see here that the range here is 2 points and the range here is only 1 point. And so I can tell that there's more error in this one than this one. Okay. And that would be 1 standard deviation error bar. If you want these to be confidence intervals, do 2 times the standard error. And that'll get you close enough for graph's sake. And that is much better than using the sort of default options. So if I click on the little error bars here, I should be able to get back here, because otherwise it calculates the standard deviation or this standard error based on the data points you entered. And so it would calculate the standard deviation of 12 and 15, which would not be the standard deviation of the data at all. So these options are not very good for you. Okay. Instead, we should use the real data numbers. Now, why didn't I just put standard deviation right here next to it? Why did I put it below here? Well, it's very tempting to do this. And then just highlight the whole thing and make a chart. Okay. Don't do this. I don't want to see this. This is not an appropriate presentation of the data. Instead, it looks like it's a double IV graph, which we're about to get to, and it's not. It's the means and then the standard deviations. But these are on totally different scales because the mean is the average score, whereas the standard deviation is the average range around that mean. So instead, we should have the standard deviation be around the average mean here. And so when you put them right next to each other, it's very tempting to do the wrong type of graph, so I always put them underneath. So it forces me to use them in a different way. All right. Last but very not least, let's do 2 IV bar charts. And you can take this Excel file and use it to edit and add your own data so that this is already all kind of set up for you if you'd like. But make sure you're changing all of the information here to be whatever example you're working on. So we're going to type in our labels and then type in means. We're going to type in standard deviations and then edit away. So for a 2 IV chart, we're going to have to make a little square. So we're going to have some sort of X variable. So it might still be the control group and the experimental group. Right? And so that's one IV. Now our other IV might be, I am famous for cheese examples, so it might be people who like feta cheese versus people who like Swiss. Weirdos. Right. And so you'll see lots of cheese examples. It's just an easy thing for me to do. Perfect things in the world are cheese, shoes, and vodka. So that's my joke with students. Then we would type in the means here. So let's just make up some numbers. Cats are trying to help. There we go. 2. Now let's type in the standard deviations down here. We'll take this whole box, put this here. So this is the means here. And these are the standard deviations here. So that's going to be a big standard deviation and 1 here. Same basic idea. Highlight just the data you want. Now these are the labels that are going to come up, so make them look nice, proper case. Click Insert. And then first chart here, our cluster column graph is what we would like. And so we're going to get rid of this thing. We're going to get rid of these bars. And then we're just going to kind of futz with all the lines till we get what we want. So I'm going to click on this axis over here. Right click, format axis. And then let's just change everything. Let's say this is a 1 to 7 scale. Oh no, 1 to 7 won't work. 1 to 10. So I'm going to change the range of the data over here. And so let's say that's the range of the scores that I got. Okay, we figured out a minute ago that you click on this paint thing here, and we click on solid line to get our line to come up. I think I can click on this axis now, click solid line to make them both be solid. Great. Now I want to change all the fonts. So come over here and click home, start messing with the font, making sure it's readable, size 12. That looks really big blowing up on my computer, but printing wise 12 is, once they shrink the graph down to print it, is much more readable. I'm going to click on chart design, add chart element, axis titles to get both my X and Y label, and now that's really important. So this particular one is our cheese group, and this title out here is going to be rating score, just to make something up here. But it's an average, so I should say it's the average rating score. And again, we're going to play with the font a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing to the legend here. Now, this legend is fine, and it can be down here, but often I like to put legends up here, especially because there tends to be a lot of white space here in the graph, which means I can then make the usable space of the graph a little bigger. So I'm just going to move my legend up here, and that's just a personal preference. I just think it looks much nicer because it's in the space of the graph instead of taking up this extra space down here. Now I can make this graph black and white, so let's make this different colors here. And then what do we want to do? We want to add the error bars. Okay, so this is probably the most complicated part. So I'm going to click on this first group here, And that first group, see how it highlighted these lines? That'll help you here in a second. So I want to highlight these two going across because that's the line that's highlighted here. So when I selected these two bars by clicking on the first one, it highlighted this to show me which one to highlight. Add chart element, error bars, more options. Come over here, click custom, specify value, highlight that same thing going across twice. So I'll click on this little square right here, highlight again. They should say exactly the same thing. Click OK. Okay. Excel will crash for whatever reason. I don't know what I did to piss Excel off today, but tomorrow's New Year's, so maybe it'll be happier with us then. Oh man, I thought I hit save more often than that. Okay, so give me 2 seconds and I will recreate this graph, and then it'll go magic and it'll pop right back up. Alright, back this time with the graph. So something I learned just sort of quickly while I was futzing around recreating this graph was that you don't have to click on each individual element to change the font. If you have the whole graph labeled, highlighted, you can change the font all at once, which is much faster. So I recommend creating all of your labels and everything, have the graph highlighted just so that the 4 big dots are on the graph, meaning like this. And then you can play with however font-wise you want this to look. Okay? Much faster. So something new I just learned. This time, let's try to make those error bars without Excel crashing. Fingers crossed. So I'm going to highlight this bar again. Remember, it looks like it picks the first row here. So we're going to do chart design, add chart element, error bars, more, click custom, specify value, highlight going across because that was the way it had picked them a minute ago, across, okay. Such that these two are end up being the same thing, which is not what I just did. Oops, highlight the same row, sorry. So these should be exactly the same. And so see what happened here? It gave me the little plus. That's going to really screw things up. So you want to highlight this whole thing if you make that mistake and backspace. Click this little button again, highlight this row. Okay, so you want them to look exactly the same because we want the same positive and negative value, so it's even on each side. Click OK, fingers crossed, hit save. Okay. And so because that error bar is 4 points, it's kind of a lot. It actually runs off the graph. So I might look at that and go, oh, the range of the data is only 1 to 10, so I screwed something up here. So this should probably, I mistyped. It shouldn't be 4, it should be 3. Okay. And that will also auto update. It's still running off the graph. It's coming straight up here to 10. So I would move this label around a little bit. And if you want them right next to each other, you can drag and drop like this. So I'm going to find a way to make this fit where it's readable, but it doesn't overlap anything else. Okay, so we got lots of options here. Let's do the other one. So I'm going to click on these bars here. See how it's highlighted the second row, so that's what I want to work with. Click chart design, add, error bars, more options, custom, specify. Let's do this bottom row here. Click this one again, bottom row again. They're the same thing, hit OK. Then Excel is going to crash for reasons that I don't even know what my Excel is doing, but that is how we would create a double bar graph. And hopefully your computer is not being as cranky as my computer is, because this is ridiculous. But that's how we'd create that bar graph. It saved it. It's pretty close to where it was. So let's see if I can make some magic happen here. Kind of recreate what I had. So I can change this here. Chart design. Quick hit save constantly. I'm hoping you can hear my washing machine play music for you. I screwed that up. Let me backspace that out. Try again. Just these two. Okay, make sure they're the same. Hit OK. I'm going to very quickly hit save, so in case Excel crashes again. All right, the only other thing that I would teach you is how to make a line graph. So when is it appropriate to use a bar graph and when is it appropriate to use a line graph? So bar graphs are really for discrete categories when there's no reason to think that there is a line to connect these. So there's no intermediate points between these cheese groups. And so if I actually had the type of data where it's like dosage or time across the bottom, it might be appropriate to do a line graph. The really beautiful thing about Excel when it's not crashing, good grief, is that I can actually just change the type of chart. So change chart type here, I can switch that straight to a line graph and it will add leave my error bars there. Now I'd have to move some stuff around because it squished my group labels over here, but then I could go, you know what, this is actually discrete data. I'm gonna switch back to a bar graph. So to me, that's one of the nice things about Excel, is that is a very simple change. So if I ask you for a line graph, which is going to be a pretty rare event because most of what we do is discrete categories for this type of graph. These will be used when we talk about ANOVAs, t-tests, so very discrete data, scatter plots for when we have regression data. But if you need a line graph because, let's say, your advisor says, make me a line graph. Number one rule, always do what your advisor says. And so that's how you could take what I've shown you how to do here, click change chart type and switch to a line graph just to make them happy. All right, so given that Excel does not freak out on you, doesn't crash 1,000 times, that is how you make scatter plots with regression lines or without, 1 IV bar charts and 2 IV bar charts, or switch them to line graphs.